Hello dear subscribers and watchers, how are things on your side? Again, this is me Saidilia here from Computer Science for Self-Taught. In this video we will learn SQLite Database alongside Android, because SQLite Database is embedded itself inside the Android operating system. We will learn how to create the schema of our database and how to create the data model of our database class. So these are the contents that we will discuss about. First one is SQLite Database. We will learn about it, how to implement SQLite Database in Android Studio. In the previous video we have learned that what is SQLite Database, what are its properties, and what makes it so special, or what makes it different from other databases. Then we have learned about cursor, that cursor is nothing but it is a class that it holds the result set that have been returned by the queries that we have written to the query methods or raw query methods, which returns as a subset of our table, and we store them inside the cursor variable. Then we have learned that if we want to pass values to the database and insert them into our tables, we have learned that we can use the content values in here, and we will learn implementing SQLite Database and how to back up data in case of any deletion or insertion. So first we will discuss about data model and subclasses of OpenHelper query. We will learn how to insert, delete, update, and how to count the number of rows that have been returned by the query that we have written. And we will instantiate OpenHelper class and we will work with the database. So let's go ahead further and let's stick to the plan. As I've told you before, SQLite is a lightweight database, and it is a scaled down version of other databases like MySQL, PostgreSQL, and many other famous databases. And it is versatile. But the versatile, I mean it is multi-purpose. It can be used by many other devices like HTC, Samsung, or even iPhone. And straightforward, I mean it is so easy to implement it in the Android Studio and use it. And if you want to store your data in a structured format and you want to store them persistently in the app, so you can use the SQLite database to do this for you. And if you are changing the data frequently or access those data and search them, SQLite is also meant for this purpose. And this database is stored alongside the app inside a private storage for storing your app's data. Neither other users nor other apps can access it. And if you want to cache data from the cloud and store them persistently, so you can use the SQLite in this purpose, because data are represented as rows and columns inside the SQLite database. It is a relational database, and bear in mind that it does not support trigger, but it follows the ACID properties of relational database. If you haven't learned about ACID properties, make sure that you watch our previous video and rehearse them until you understand them properly. So let's go ahead further. So these are the components of SQLite database. If you want to use or show your data recycler view of your app, so there are some steps or some components or the skeleton that you need to understand. First one is your SQLite database, where your data is stored persistently in here, and by using the SQLite OpenHelper, it manages your database for you. It checks if the database exists, it opens the database for you. If it does not exist, it will create the database for you. Then after that, we will create another class as the name of adapter, and by using this adapter class, we will show our data to the cycler view. In order to access the SQLite database, we must extend our class from the SQLite OpenHelper, because SQLite database is represented as SQLite database object, and all interactions to the database will be done through the SQLite OpenHelper. If these things are still tricky for you and you don't understand them, don't worry too much about it, because in the next video we will work out a nice example with the Android Studio. You will learn there how to insert, how to execute your queries, and how to return results from your database, and how you can create the schema of your database. So make sure yourself, if you don't understand anything or you still understand a little from these tutorials, make sure that you rehearse them, repeat them until you understand them perfectly. And I'll do my best to create these tutorials straightforward for you so that you can understand them. And by using this SQLite OpenHelper, you can execute your queries, manage your database, whether your database existed or not. If it exists, so the SQLite OpenHelper will open that that database to you and return an object of SQLite database. So you need to store that reference inside a SQLite object, because it is the aim of SQLite OpenHelper to separate your data from the interaction of your app. And by using this database, you can keep complex and manageable. And we will learn how to use the cursor's data type to store the results of the queries that we have written or that we pass to the database, and store that result set or subset of table and store them into the cursor variable, because it's a pointer into a row of data structured data. You can think of a cursor as an array of rows and columns, and this cursor class has several methods for moving the pointer from one row to another row and getting data from the row that pointer points to it, because SQLite database always returns results as cursor variable. We will also cover cursor in the next tutorial, how to use cursor in order to store the results set that are returned from the query that we have written. So there are some common cursor operations that you can use to get the data from the cursor. Call the getCount method, count the number of rows in the cursor. If the cursor is empty, this method will return 0, that the cursor is empty, or there may be a problem with the query that you have written to the query method to return you the results. So if you want to get the number of rows as counted from the cursor, so you can call this method. And another one is getColumnName. Column name returns you a string array with column name. If you want to store or if you want to get the column name from the cursor, so you can call this method. And if you want to get the position of the current cursor, call the getPosition method to return you the current position of the cursor. And if you want to get data from those columns or rows, call these methods getString and getInt. If the data that you want to be stored in the form of a string, so call getString. If that data is integer and you want to gain them as a integer, so you can call this getInt method. And call these move to first and move to next method to iterate through the cursor value. If you call move to first, it gives you to the first row of the table. And if you call move to next, so you can iterate through move to next from one row to another. If you are in the 13 rows and you want to return back to the first row, so you can call the move to first method to get you to the first row of the data. Make sure that you close the cursor and also the object of the database that you have used. If you do not close them, you will lose a lot of resources. As an Android or mobile phone, these resources are less, so you must release all resources and invalidate cursors. We will learn how to close the cursor in the next tutorial. So we will learn now the processing of cursor, how cursor works. When you call the raw query method by the DB object, which is nothing but our database object, and when you pass your query, so this raw query method returns you the subset of your table, and this raw query returns that subset of table as a cursor, so you must store them inside the cursor variable. And if you want to iterate from one row to another row, so you can use while loop to iterate for you, and inside while loop call the move to next, because with this move to next method you can go from one row to another row. Do not call move to first, because it will be an infinite loop if you use move to first in here. If you want to get only one row from the cursor, so if you want to get row number 1 from the cursor, so you can call the method move to first in order to get this row of data. And always bear in mind that the cursor points before the first row. Okay, if you want to get the first row, make sure that you call the move to first. And if you want to iterate through these rows, so you can call move to next method and provide it inside the while loop, which it returns you through till it reaches to the end. When it reaches to the end, so it returns you null, which means there is no row remain, so you can finish the while loop. And inside the in here you can do something with the data, and after that close the cursor. Make sure that you always put the database operations inside the try and catch block, and after you have finished or after you have done with them, make sure you close them in order to release the resources and invalidate cursors. We will also use the content values, which we will use it to store our data in the form of key value pair, where key is nothing but it is the name of the table and value is nothing but it is the data that we want to put inside that column. So an instance of content value represents one row of a table, and it stores data as a key value pair. As I've told you before, key is nothing but it is the name of the column. Make sure that you provide the name of the column as a key. If you provide other things instead of column name, so your app will crash on runtime and it will not store your data persistent to the database. So always use column name as key for our content values. We will also work out a nice example about this. And value is nothing but it is the value for the field or the cell that we want to store there. And it is used to pass raw data between methods. If you still do not know how to use content values, don't worry. We will work out a nice example alongside other stuff that we have learned so far in the Android Studio. Our end, in order to conceptualize your understanding about SQLite database and SQLite operations. So now let's see how to use content values. So call the constructor of the content values and store that inside the content value object, which is of type content values. You can use this content value to insert one row. And if you want to insert multiple rows, so you can use loop to insert multiple rows into the column. As you can see, we use the value object in here, and I call the put method in order to put the data into the table. So in here it is the key and here is the data, because it stores data as a map. If you have learned Java, you know how to deal with map, because it maps your data with the key. Key in here is nothing but it is your column name. Make sure that you provide your column name in here, otherwise if you put other values it won't work. As you can see, here is the key, which is nothing but the column name, and this is the data for this column. And after that, call the insert method by the DB object, which is nothing our database object, and provides or pass the parameters of insert method. The first parameter is nothing but it is the table name, and we will learn what is this null, why we use null in here, because it is a null column hack. We will also learn in Android Studio why we must pass null in here. Don't worry too much about it if you don't understand anything right now. We will work on a nice example so you can understand them 100%. And then you pass the content values object, which you have created here. So let's learn how to implement the SQLite database inside the Android Studio. You always need to create a data model class. A data model class is nothing but it is a class with setters and getters, which it sets the data to the database and gets the data from our database. We will create a data model class, okay? It is a class that deals with data. And after that, extends the data model class from the SQLite OpenHelper, because SQLite OpenHelper, it manages your database interactions with your app. So create constants for tables, create their columns. We will also learn how to create constants or columns of the table in the Android Studio programmatically, and implement the onCreate method which create a SQLite database and create its tables, and also implement the onUpgrade method. Call the onUpgrade method if you have done any change with the schema of your database. And also there are some optional methods if you want to implement inside your data model class. You can call these methods query, insert, delete, update, count to run your query and return your favorite results. Inside the main activity class, create an instance of SQLite OpenHelper, and by this instance, we will call the getWritable or getReadable database in order to open the database for us and start interacting with the database. And we call the methods of SQLite OpenHelper to work with the database, as we will work out a nice example in the Android Studio in the upcoming slides. As I've told you, data model is nothing but it is a class with getters and setters. This is our data model class as the name of word item, and it has some constants for the table. We will use these values for the column names. We will also learn how to create a data model class in the next video. So let's create our subclass of SQLite OpenHelper. Create a class at the name of word list OpenHelper, or create or name it what you want. You can also name it as A, B, C, D or other things, and after that extends that class from the SQLite OpenHelper. Because it's an abstract class, it has some abstract methods like onCreate and onUpgrade. So you must implement them inside this word list OpenHelper class. After you have created your class, create a constructor of this class and call the super constructor of the parent class and pass a parameter. The first parameter is nothing but it is the context which you are in. You pass that through using the word listen OpenHelper object, and you pass the constructor as context. Second parameter is nothing but it is your database name. The second cursor factory, if you want to create your cursor factory, pass the object in here. And the third one is the database version. We will use this database version if we want to make any change in the schema of our database. Each time you change the schema, make sure that you use a different database version. It must not be familiar with the previous versions that you have set to your database version. If you use the same database version from old schemas, your app will crash and you won't be able to create your database and tables.